I think we all remember what happened on March 13th of 2020. That was the day that the whole COVID crisis came home for America when Donald Trump declared a state of emergency here in America, giving the president unprecedented powers, essentially, over and above the Constitution. The Constitution didn't matter anymore after that, and it still doesn't, because that was the final nail in the coffin of what was called the U.S. Constitution. If the Patriot Act was the second to the final nail in 2001, well, then in 2020, it was definitely this. So March 13th, 2020 is widely remembered as the day the crisis became real for many people, especially in the US and Europe. On that Friday, then President Trump formally declared COVID-19 a national emergency in the United States, unlocking about $50 billion in federal funds and signaling a major shift from downplaying the virus to open crisis mode. This declaration came when only around 1,600 confirmed infections, which we all know now were made up, were reported in the US, but cases were already surging globally and fear of what was coming was rising fast. Yep, all manufactured by the media. And so I think we all get the point. I think we all remember that day, and that day was the final day that the Constitution of the United States actually even existed. Because after that, that Emergency Act put everything under FEMA, and FEMA under the WHO. And then also the PrEP Act came into effect. And that PrEP Act is what prevents everyone involved in this from being prosecuted, from Fauci and, you name it. All of those folks, Bill Gates, every one of them, are protected by what they call the PrEP Act. They have basically they've got immunity. Essentially, what you could almost say is diplomatic immunity. They can't be touched for anything regarding COVID. So that's why all of this bluster and all of this talk, and all of these arguments between Fauci and Rand Paul and all that, they're all fake. None of it matters as long as the PrEP Act remains in effect, and all of those people know it. Rand Paul is controlled opposition. He's there to give you a voice, to give you it's like a relief valve, the pressure relief valve. That's what he is. To give you some kind of a voice in all of this. And yet nothing ever happens. Nobody ever gets prosecuted. Why? Presidential emergency management, presidential emergency orders. It's the secret Doomsday book that enables Trump abuses of power and all the abuses of power we've seen from the presidents over the years, not just Trump. This is written by Seymour Hersh over on Substack. They're called presidential emergency action documents, and they have a long history. But Trump's invocation of them on immigration betrays their original purpose. So here we go. And keep in mind, these are all secret. These are not reviewable by Congress. This is an account of the authorities, many of them top secret and higher, that permit Donald Trump and his more knowledgeable senior aides to carry on their violent and vicious attacks on minorities and those who disagree with them and their policies, with legislative and even legal impunity. The answer lies in most cases with what are known as presidential emergency action documents, which have enabled Trump today and his predecessors before him to suspend fundamental constitutional rights, detain civilians, seize property, impose martial law, and censor communications. These extraordinary powers have been put to widespread use by Trump and his aides, such as White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and Director of the Office of Management and Budget Russell Voigt. They have acted with no congressional authority, no judicial review, and no statutory mechanism for Congress to terminate their powers once activated, as they have been since Trump took office. These little-known and rarely discussed authorities have been developed across more than a dozen administrations since Dwight Eisenhower was in office by presidents of both political parties, and their secrecy and authority have yet to be successfully challenged in Congress or by a federal court. And I'm sure that's by design. One of the most detailed accounts of PEDS, last updated in 2024, have been prepared by the Brennan Center for Justice, a public policy group sponsored by the NYU School of Law. It warns of the political danger of PEDS as extraordinary secret presidential documents that have never been declassified or leaked. It appears that they're not even subject to congressional oversight, although the law requires the executive branch to report even the most sensitive covert military and intelligence operations to at least some members of Congress. There is no such disclosure requirement for PEDS, and no evidence that the documents have ever been shared with relevant congressional committees. So they can operate as kings with these orders, and they are. I'm summarizing here the initial paragraphs for what is perhaps the most detailed and up-to-date private study of PEDS, written by Joel McCleary, a former aide to President Carter and an expert on biological weapons. McCleary has steeped himself for decades in the study of secret presidential authorities. He's a low-profile Harvard graduate who served as treasurer of the Democratic National Committee during the Carter administration and later led projects for the Defense Department and Homeland Security regarding pandemic and biological defense issues. I wrote a book on chemical and biological warfare and worked with members of Congress in the months before President Nixon agreed in 1969 to enact a U.S. ban on such weapons. A friendship was inevitable when McCleary and I first met decades ago, but we grew closer after Trump took office for a second time in 2025 and began a massive attack on the federal government workforce and authorized Stephen Miller, who by any standard is a sadistic extremist, and you can just look at him and see that, to carry out the mass deportation of Hispanics and others, both undocumented individuals and persons in the country legally, often separating parents and young children. McCleary began to tutor me then about the vast legal authorities Trump had under PEDS. These powers had accumulated in earlier presidencies as the Congress continued to disagree on legislation to deal with the immigration policy. Trump, Miller, and ICE, relying on secret PEDS, have increasingly divided America with their overtly aggressive tactics. That's the danger that this was not theoretical, McCleary writes in his recent private memorandum, was confirmed in October of 2024 when Time revealed that Mark Harvey, a former special assistant to Trump in his first term as president, who personally oversaw the classified binder of PEDS known to some inside the White House as the Doomsday Book, publicly warned that the institutional safeguards he once worked within during Trump's first term no longer existed. During Trump's first term, Harvey explained, the senior national security staff deliberately shielded the president from learning the full extent of emergency authority, fearing he would invoke them in situations far short of the catastrophic crisis for which they were designed. Harvey's published warning was prescient. Trump is going to be surrounded by a set of people who are going to say, you have the power to do this. Frankly, Harvey said, if he says yes, and there are people that go do it, what's to stop him? Indeed. McCleary makes clear why these powers were created. In a genuine existential crisis, such as a nuclear attack, a catastrophic cyber attack on national infrastructure, or a pandemic of civilian threatening severity may well provide the powers that a president legitimately needs to preserve the continuity of the nation. The problem is not that the powers exist. The problem is that they exist without any of the constitutional guardrails that the framers considered essential to a Republican government. That's what we're supposed to be. That's what we're supposed to be, by the way. Not a democracy. That's what the media tells you. We're supposed to be a constitutional republic. However, Benjamin Franklin said it perfectly. You have a republic if you can keep it, he said. Indeed. It requires a vigilant citizenry, and we've been far from vigilant. I think we could all take a share of that blame. But anyway, so there's no congressional review, no judicial oversight, no statutory definition of what constitutes a qualifying emergency, and no mechanism to prevent a president, any president of any party in any future administration, which there won't be, but if there were, well, they can invoke these powers in circumstances far short of an existential crisis, which they already have. The risk is inherent in the structure, not in any individual. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, every time. McCleary writes that framing mass immigration as a national security crisis has been normalized in political discourse across multiple administrations. Detention infrastructure is being expanded on an unprecedented scale. Yeah, remember the warehouses I told you about? They're being converted right now into detention centers. The events of January 6, 2021, in which the vice president exercised de facto emergency command authority in response to the riot at the Capitol without formal legal authorization, while the president declined to act, demonstrated that the emergency command structure can be invoked in response to domestic political crisis, not only the foreign military attacks for which it was originally designed. and the legal framework governing who holds that authority is dangerously undefined. The public can't guard against what it doesn't know exists. The Constitution cannot constrain powers it has never been asked to review. This memorandum is written so that both can. Next week, I'll report on past occasions when PEDs have been invoked, when presidents have seen fit to avoid congressional oversight, including the Iran-Contra affair. Yeah, that was huge back then, if you guys aren't familiar with that, from the mid to late 1980s. So that's when we were selling weapons to Iran and using the profits to fund the war in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. They were selling drugs, all kinds of stuff. The CIA created the crack epidemic of the late 80s. They funded it, and they used the profits from it to fund their illegal wars around the world. Now they just take it straight out of the budget, and they have audits that they fail all the time, and nobody cares. The Pentagon fails audit after audit after audit, and it just, becomes routine news anymore. It's unreal how many trillions of dollars are missing. But these secret presidential emergency action documents are a big part of that, including the emergency that was declared on March 13th, although that was very public. March 13th of 2020. Wow. To me, that's a date that'll live in infamy. That's for sure. That's when everything around the world changed. All at once. Amazing. And that will be it for this particular episode. Don't forget, don'tspeaknews.com is home base for all that we do. There's over 3,500, I think now, stories, videos, blog posts, all kinds of things here. And a lot of them that we can't post anywhere else. And so if you'd like to support the channel, we do have our annual fundraiser going on for website hosting, domain name renewals, and all of that stuff. And so that will be posted up on the blog as well. And we have a channel support tab. So if you want to support us, you can always just click on that tab, and all the links to do so are right here, including Cash App and Venmo. And then to find us around the internet, Rumble, BitChute, Telegram, click on that tab, and all the links to find us are right there. And that will be it for now. God bless, take care. Johnny Storm, Don't Speak News.